leave from Public Health to manage an indoor meeting of this size during the COVID pandemic. Members are asked to remain in the seats for the entire meeting, except when speaking or when they're asked to stand. In order to register to speak, if you could kindly raise your hand, you'll automatically then be added by my Vice Chair, Councillor Jerry Bird, to the list of speakers. Please can I ask that all members turn their mobile phones, including me, to silent or vibrate while the meeting's taking place. There's no fire alarm scheduled for today, so if it does sound, then please leave by the nearest marked fire exit, which I think is that end of the room, and assemble in the car park. Toilets are available on the ground floor and refreshments are available outside the venue. So if I can move to the first item on the agenda, which is the notification of Chair. Sorry, Councillor King. Councillor King, I can also feel the draft, I must admit. Thank you. Yes, Councillor Fuller, go ahead. Okay. So Democratic Services have the passwords using the University of Cam network, and then there's a ticket ID and a password, and he will pass on to you. Apologies for that. Just one moment whilst we do that. Yeah.
Chair, I noticed one of the members of the committee was speaking that they didn't turn on their mic, and people on YouTube aren't able to hear what's going on.
Thanks a lot, Councillor Milnes. Yes, the acoustics are quite good with the microphones, but if everybody just remembers to switch on their mic and then switch off when they're not speaking. Thank you very much. First item on the agenda is notification of Chair and Vice Chair. So this is to notify the committee. Dan, is this something you present?
Yes, please, Chair. Thank you, Chair. This is to notify the committee of the appointment of Councillor Peter MacDonald as Chair of the Highways and Transport Committee by full Council.
Thank you. And notification of Vice Chair?
Thank you. This is again to notify the committee of the appointment of Councillor Jerry Bird as Vice Chair of the committee by full Council.
Thank you very much. Can I move on to apologies for absence and declarations of interest? Could the Democratic Services Officer report to us any apologies for absence?
I've received apologies for absence from Councillor Dew, and Councillor Corney is substituting for him.
Many thanks. And does any member wish to declare any disclosable pecuniary interest or non-statutory disclosable interest at this point? Councillor Murphy.
I'd like to, in relation to item 6, I'd like to, for complete transparency, reference my register of interests in relation to my employment.
Councillor Murphy, I'm sorry, I just couldn't hear you. Would it be possible to... Yeah, thank you very much.
Apologies. In relation to item 6, I would, for completeness, like to reference my register of interest.
Thank you very much. Any other declarations of interest, members? Can I please move to item 4, which is minutes of the meeting the 9th of March 2021. I think it's actually only perhaps Councillor King who was present at that meeting. Does everybody have a copy of the minutes of the 9th of March? If I can go through the minutes page by page, please. They're not marked in page numbers, but if I can take the first page from 72 to 76, any changes from that? Page 2, which goes on to item 77. Page 3, which covers item 78. Page 4, which covers item down to 79. Page 5. Page 6, covering item 80. Page 7, continuation. Page 8, which is continuation. Page 9, item 81. Page 10, item 82. Page 11, continuing, and page 12, continuing. Page 13, item 83. Page 14, item 84. And the final page, which is item 85. Can I approve those minutes as a true and accurate record of the meeting on the 9th of March? Somebody proposed, Councillor Howell, and seconded by Councillor King. Thank you very much, both of you. So, item 5. We have received a public question and request to speak from local members. I propose to take those, if that's okay. Councillor King, go ahead.
Forgive me, Mr. Chairman. We skipped over the action log.
Thank you very much, Councillor King. So we're asked to note an updated action log. Do any members have any questions about the action log and anything that may not be there? Go ahead, Councillor King.
Probably comes as no surprise as I spotted the missing action log. You'll see there's a reference to the Wisbech cycling map, which funding has been secured for which I'm very grateful to officers for that. There is something else that I think we ought to be, as a committee, supporting, and that is a highways planning guidance for how to make walking and cycling the most convenient and attractive way to travel. Now, we don't actually have that, believe it or not, at the county at the moment. I've had an exchange of emails with officers, and for a modest sum of money, to have a proper document that would be of use to us all in all of our divisions, the cost is going to be between £5,000 and £10,000, which, you know, in the great scheme of things, is nothing. And I just would like that to be included on our action log, so that we can not lose sight of the importance of such a document. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Can I get officers to make a comment or observation on that, please?
Chair, thank you. I'd like, if I can, to pick that up with Councillor King and talk to officers about the detail and the scope of the work that is being suggested, and perhaps come back to you, Chair and Vice Chair, with the outcome of that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Steve. I'm very happy with that, but I think it would be useful just to flag it up on the action log so we don't lose sight of it, if that's acceptable. Thank you.
I think that makes sense. Thanks a lot, Councillor King. So, as I mentioned, we will take any public questions and requests to speak from local members as we go on the individual item. So, on item 6, which is the traffic regulation order, objections associated with Cambridgeshire County Council, King's Parade traffic management order. And can I ask one of the officers to introduce this section? Thank you, Sonia.
Thanks. Okay, it's working now. Okay, the purpose of the paper today is in relation to the publication of the King's Parade traffic management order, and it's to determine objections lodged during the consultation period. In terms of background, counter-terrorism policing identify King's Parade as an area of concern for a possible vehicle as a weapon attack due to the location, number of visitors and ease of access by motor vehicles. The committee needs to determine the
Sonia, and I thought it was just me. I'm really struggling to hear you at all.
Right, okay. I'll start again if that's all right. Thanks. Can you hear me now? Yes, okay. Good morning.
That's much better.
Right, I'll start again. The purpose of the paper today is in relation to the publication of the King's Parade Traffic Management Order, and it's to determine objections lodged during the consultation period. The background is that counter-terrorism policing identified King's Parade in Cambridge as an area of concern for a possible vehicle as a weapon attack, due to the location, number of visitors and ease of access by motor vehicles. The committee needs to determine objections set out in the appendix report. I think it's important to note that the order relates to the access by vehicles and closing the access to the King's Parade and not to the design of the gates. So the design of the gates and the gaps for the cyclist is something that can be looked at. In 2.2, it explains that the City Council who are promoting this order are intending to do a permanent design. The current gates are a temporary measure, whilst a permanent solution is designed. And so some of the issues that were raised in the consultation we can take back to the City Council to consider as part of the design. So yeah, if there's any questions. Thank you. Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you. At this point, do members have any questions for Sonia before I invite our colleague from CamCycle? Councillor Mills.
Yep, got one that works, thank you. Let's try and remember what my question was now. Right, so in terms of the police's, you talked of it as an area of concern, and I wondered what sort of risk analysis we'd seen for the justification for this. Because when I look back on the history of such attacks, by 2017-18, internationally, they died away as a phenomenon. We're obviously very familiar with the German market that was attacked, and the even worse one in Nice, which was 84 people killed, I believe. So clearly, at one point, there was this was a particular phenomenon. But I've never seen any risk assessment of the likelihood of an attack and its possible consequences, and therefore justification for this as a mitigation. Thank you.
Thank you. So through the chairman, I am not a counter-terrorism officer. This is something we're going on advice from the police, counter-terrorism, and so that isn't a question I can answer.
Sure, so thank you for that, but I don't know whether it's possible through you, Chair, to actually ask for that information
Because it seems to me that if this is a response predicated on a risk assessment, and particularly if it's out of date as a risk assessment, then we should be aware of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Milnes. Councillor King.
My mic, sorry. Thank you, Chair. I have some reservations about this, but I think that the police have clearly identified that this is a threat. So I think that we need to support it. But I just wanted to ask Sonia if and when we are going to enter into the SLA that the Chief Constable recommends in his letter, because I think that's essential that we do that so we do have some flexibility on enforcement. Thank you.
Councillor King, I think that's a good idea. Call for Councillor Howell and then Councillor Shaler.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, I have got concerns about this, but at the same time, we've got to be very practical about this, and I will be supporting it. My concern is, of course, that these terrorist attacks, especially with motor vehicles, can take place anywhere. But let's be honest, in front of King's College, Cambridge would be a world-renowned site, would be something that they could be aimed at and be used by the terrorists for great propaganda. Therefore, I will be voting and supporting this. However, it is with reluctance, but at the same time a practical approach. But this could still happen anywhere in our county, God forbid, at any time.
Thank you, Councillor Howell. Councillor Shaler.
I just want to see if I can turn it on. Yeah. Following on from Councillor Milne, I too would be very interested to see the security report, if we can get something. As long as I've lived in Cambridge, the only attempted attack has been from the far right on the mosques in Mill Road. And so I'm a little bit worried that just the identification of a site with a huge gate on it has the tendency to make it look like a target. And this has an effect on the population that is very similar to terrorizing them. I wanted to put that comment there.
Thank you very much. Very good points. Do we have any other contributions or inputs? Councillor Murphy, go ahead.
Yes, through the Chair, please, to the officer, I would just like to clarify as a fact what the legal basis for the recommendation is. The recommendation that the only option that we have to provide continued protection for the general public is a permanent order and not an option of another temporary order, which seems to be a possibility in the legislation. I'd just like it clarified, please, what the legal basis of the recommendation is.
Sonia, please, could you feedback on that point?
Sure. The legal basis is that the temporary order is for 18 months, and whilst that's been running, we've been consulting on the permanent order. So the next step is the permanent order.
Thank you. Councillor Beckett and then Councillor Murphy.
Thank you very much. I just want to actually echo what Councillor Shaler was saying about the design of the barrier. I know that's obviously not within our remit, but I do think, given the sensitivity of the site, that we need to ensure that going forwards we don't have something that looks like a security barrier, and that we should be doing this security very passively. And I implore the designs of it to look at Edinburgh and the things that were done around the Parliament building there, and other design that will allow it to fit in with our glorious city and work in such a way that tourists and visitors don't perceive it as a security issue, because we are very much in risk of terrorising ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Murphy.
Yes, I'm very concerned about the safety audit to see the detail of that and understand exactly how it was conducted, and I would request that it is published. The barrier is not safe, in my opinion, and I would be very concerned to see, interested to see the detail of that report.
Thank you, Councillor Murphy. So I'd like to, before we move into any item of debate, but I'm hearing quite a lot of support, I think, for the permanent order, however, maybe with some follow-up actions. So could I call on Matthew Danish from CamCycle, and then I'll come to Councillor King. And we may have to get, or maybe move Sonia's microphone across. I don't know.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Great. All right. Thank you, members of the Highways and Transport Committee. My name is Matthew Danish. I'm a volunteer trustee with the Cambridge Cycling Campaign, or CamCycle. We work for more, better, and safer cycling for all ages and abilities, particularly as a mode of sustainable transport in the region. We understand that the police have recommended a scheme of this nature. However, with some essential changes, it could create a much better, safer, and more accessible environment for all. King's Parade, as we know, is famous around the world, but it is not a museum. It is a heavily used and well-loved public space at the heart of our city. It is also one of the country's busiest streets for cycling, under the typical everyday conditions that we knew before the pandemic and hope to see return. It deserves to have a really beautiful and practical design that is also safe and inclusive. With the new administration, we hope that councillors will encourage officers to tackle these issues in a more visionary way, living up to the latest standards of design. We note that Appendix 3 of the officer's report claims that there has been little change in the level of personal injury accidents reported, but we find this to be unsatisfactory because pretty much the entire experimental period has been spent battling a worldwide pandemic which has suppressed the usual flow of students, shoppers, commuters, and tourists here. We don't know when the usual activities will resume, but it will happen someday, and the temporary barriers are not suitable for the circumstances in which thousands of students are rushing to lectures all at the same time without any alternative but to cycle on King's Parade, in addition to all the residents and visitors trying to get around. The lecture rush happens periodically throughout the day, so it cannot be addressed by opening the barrier only in the morning. Secondly, personal injuries are rarely recorded if a motor vehicle is not involved and the police are not called to the scene. In practice, we can see that the temporary barriers are creating conflict, and the particular arrangement of them severely reduces accessibility. There are nominally 3 openings to walk or cycle past the barrier, but at least 1, sometimes 2, is usually blocked. Then it turns into a free-for-all, with people walking through the cycle route or cycling through the walking route, whichever happens to be available. The cycle gap is of substandard size, and to make matters worse, half of it is in the gutter. That can cause people to slip and fall while trying to maneuver through the tight space. Some people have told us that they have stopped using King's Parade as a result of not feeling safe, trying to pass through the small gap in the barrier, especially with cargo cycles. Therefore, if the Council is going to press forward with this scheme, then we ask that the committee push for a better design for the barrier. It is entirely possible to balance the DFT's imperative for inclusive cycling, LTN 120, with counterterrorism goals to create a workable solution for all. The pavements on both sides should be kept as clear as possible, while stopping vehicles, of course, so that people walking or using wheelchairs or mobility scooters are fully accommodated. Within the carriageway, there should be at least 2 gaps for cycling, northbound and southbound, each having sufficient clearance for cargo cycles, tricycles, and disability-adapted cycles. The surface quality should be even and smooth within those gaps instead of straddling the gutter. The rising bollards have been deemed suitable for the northern end of King's Parade, and they would be a fine solution at the southern end, but if that's not enough, then we'd be happy to work with the officers to find a better solution. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that input. Very interesting and valuable. Councillor King.
Thank you again, Chair. Like you, I strongly support what has just been said. But what I wanted from Sonia, this was the reason for my hand going up, is that assurance that we will enter into an SLA with the city and the police, as suggested in the Chief Constable's letter. Could I have that assurance, Sonia, please?
Yes, we have got an agreement with them about the opening of the barrier.
Is it what the Chief Constable is requesting, Sonia?
I'm happy to clarify that with the Chief Constable, but it was we came to an agreement with the police and the City Council about how we'd open the barrier, and the counter-terrorism officer was involved in it.
With respect, Mr. Chair, I don't think that that's quite what the Chief Constable is suggesting. So I think if, Sonia, you could go back and clarify that, because I do think his suggestion is a very sensible one. If perhaps you could check with that and then update us all, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Mandy Smith.
Thank you. It was just a quickie. I just wanted to pick up on the point mentioned by Mr. Danish about all users. I'm taking it the answer is yes, but I just wanted to check that anything we will be doing will take into account all users, whether it's wheelchairs, cyclists, walkers. I think that was the point that was trying to be made. I'm sure it's a yes, but I just wanted to clarify.
It's a good point, and yes, I think we should clarify. Yeah,
thank you.
So members, I think we've raised a number of points and suggestions and questions. The report recommendation is determine objections lodged during the formal consultation period, implement the permanent scheme as originally published, and inform injectors accordingly. I'd like to ask members if they want to now debate further. And I'm getting a sense for support for the permanent scheme, but perhaps with some follow-up actions. Councillor Beckett.
So there's just one further point that I wanted to make. I do also echo Mr. Danish's views on cyclists, mobility scooters and everything else, but there is obviously a body of work being done by the GCP about city access at the moment and traffic reduction within Cambridge. So I do wonder whether it's a point that this work should be done in collaboration with the GCP, where they're looking at changing roads within the city itself anyway.
Okay, thank you, noted. Any other members want to raise points and suggestions at this point? As I say, what I think I'm hearing is agreement to the permanent order, but a number of follow-up actions, which I'll try and summarise in a second. Okay, so in summary, I think we agree with the permanent order. However, from what I've heard from members, what we want to see is an updated cycling and accessibility and safety appraisal in line with what Councillor Smith said. Go ahead, Councillor Smith. Yes, thank you. Yeah. So cycling, to respond to Matthew's requests and CamCycle, an updated safety and accessibility for all, including cyclists and disabled. Thanks for that, Councillor Smith. I think there were questions, and we want to see additional evaluation of the physical appearance of the barrier in future over the next few months. I think what I've heard is some further discussions both with the Chief Constable and with the City around the implementation of the permanent order. I think I've heard that. And can I set, with your agreement, members, a timetable that all of this occurs within the next 6 months before the end of the year, with a view to updating or amending the permanent order, which would come back to the committee. But for the present time, the permanent order would be implemented from the 13th of July. Councillor Milnes.
There you go, sir. They don't seem to have gone to sleep.
They do,
There you go.
Thank you. So my point earlier was about the risk assessment, which we haven't had sight of. And what would be really useful would be to see the original risk assessment and then an up-to-date one. Because my point was that since 2018 there have been none of these attacks. So I'm questioning the fundamental reason for it to be there. And if a subsequent risk assessment came out showing a very much reduced risk, then I think it ought to come back to committee for re-evaluation.
Yes, thanks, Councillor Milnes. That's a good reminder. We have had input and opinion from the police, and we should see that as a committee. I agree. Councillor Giles.
Don't panic.
Don't panic, Mr. Madrigal, that's better. Yes, Chairman, thank you for that. We'll finally get there. My understanding of a traffic order is that the traffic order is permanent, but the obstacles could be moved. Is that correct?
That's also my understanding, that the permanent traffic order can be amended, revoked, updated at any point, Councillor Giles.
No, that's not what I said. The order is there. So the objections about the lumps of concrete, etc., could be removed at such a time in the future, but the order would still be there in case there was a need to put the lumps of concrete back. Is that correct or not?
I'll just get the officers to confirm.
The design of the lumps of concrete, they aren't actually lumps of concrete, but the barrier is not part of the order. The order is to stop vehicles going up there. So, as I explained earlier, the design is something that that can be changed.
Councillor Bird.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just wondering, could we add a couple of other recommendations onto this over the concerns about the access and cycling and the gate, the width and stuff?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So are there some specific ones you've got in mind, Councillor Bird?
Well, definitely the access for everybody. So that's very important. And also what Councillor Miles was talking about. I think we need to add that on as well.
Okay, so noted. So members, I think we're minded to approve the permanent order, but with this additional work and feedback to the committee at some stage later in the year. Thanks for... can I ask somebody... Councillor Shaler.
Just to reiterate that the City Council has done quite a lot of work on this, and I think you mentioned earlier that they will be involved.
Yeah, very good point. Okay, can I... So the recommendations, as I mentioned earlier on, are the objections lodged, implement the permanent scheme and inform the objectors accordingly. Can I have somebody to propose and to second that? Councillor Howell.
Sorry, Chairman, I just thought you asked for a proposal for this. I said I would earlier on, so I'm quite happy to propose it.
Thank you. Seconded by Councillor King. Thank you very much, members. I think that was a good discussion, and we've got some clear actions and recommendations which need to be followed up. Thank you very much. Can I move now on to item 7? Thank you, Sonia, by the way. Can I move on to item 7, which is the Black Cat to Cats and Gibbet development? Jeremy, I think, is leading on this.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. This paper covers Highways England's submission of a development consent order application to the Planning Inspectorate for a proposal to upgrade the A428 between the Black Cat roundabout in Bedfordshire and Caxton Gibbet in Cambridgeshire. The applications for a new dual carriageway and for local access roads and other associated facilities. The Planning Inspectorate has accepted the application, and the scheme is now locked into a process which will include an examination which is likely to commence this summer, potentially in late July or early August, but we await confirmation from the Planning Inspectorate. The examination will take about 6 months, and the evidence will be primarily presented by the submission of written representations. The process won't wait for us, and determination will be by the Secretary of State, informed by the report from the Planning Inspectorate. We will need to represent on issues where we have outstanding points to address with Highways England, where we require safeguards from them, or where we need further engagement if the scheme is granted consent and taken forward. We've been working jointly with Huntingdonshire District Council and South Cambridgeshire District Council to review the application and engage with Highways England, and we've also been liaising closely with the Bedfordshire authorities on the application. Relevant representations were made to the Planning Inspectorate on the 10th of June and are appended to this report. These are a high-level summary of areas that the three councils wish to discuss and agree with Highways England before the application could be supported at examination, and will be followed by more detailed written representations on outstanding issues and a local impact report. The report sets out in paragraph 2.3 areas where the Council has previously indicated its support for the proposals, and in paragraph 2.4, the broad areas where the Council considers that further discussions with Highways England are needed to resolve concerns, or where commitments are needed from them, or commitments for conditions from the Planning Inspectorate are needed to ensure that the County Council's requirements are met and its interests are protected. With regard to the particular areas where we have outstanding concerns, I'd highlight the following two. Highway design and detrunking. At the moment, we are still in discussion about the appropriate design standard for local access roads, the suitability of local access routes for all users, and the appropriate design life for the infrastructure that Highways England wishes the County Council to adopt post the scheme's implementation, including the sections of the old A428 which would be detrunked. The second item I'll mention is climate and carbon, where we have been discussing in detail with the Assistant Director for Climate Change and Energy Services, who'd like us to highlight the following issues. Firstly, the scheme will be adding to the carbon footprint of the area when the trajectory we are aiming for with the declaration of a climate emergency should really be downwards. Government has set a 78% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions by 2035 compared to 1990 levels, or 60% from today's levels, and this is a legislative position. So the Council currently has a net zero target for 2050, and we've got ambitions to bring forward targets, so just to bring that context into it. Another point is that the Cambridgeshire Independent Commission also highlighted the need for a reduction in car miles by 15% relative to a 2030 baseline, and that major new developments should be connected to neighbouring towns and transport hubs through shared public transport and safe cycling routes. And the final point I think that we would raise in this context is Highways England appear to have taken a fairly minimal approach to the assessment of patronage on East West Rail and the Camborne to Cambridge scheme, which means that their modelling may be overstating the amount of car traffic that would actually use the road. So that's the context that I think the Assistant Director wished us to raise on climate change and carbon issues. Following experience with the A14 scheme, the Council has supported the A428 project and has been working with Highways England to understand and discuss the impact of the scheme, and has taken an approach to minimise cost and liability impact on the Council with regard to any assets that we would have to take on. We've asked for binding legal agreements with Highways England to cover highways design, adoption and other matters, as well as provision within the legal text of the Development Consent Order itself. These issues remain outstanding at the current time and obviously would need to be resumed resolved by the end of the examination process. We need to consider and establish our position prior to the examination, but it is probable, given the engagement to date and lack of visibility of detail of the application prior to its submission, that we will need to make strong representations on many of the areas that are still outstanding. This will be required to protect our position in terms of the assets to be inherited and minimise the impact of the scheme on the surrounding local road network and local communities. Finally, I would draw members' attention to the recommendations, particularly C and D. C relates to a delegation to the Director of Place and Economy in consultation with the Chair and... Sorry, C, I've just read D. Confirm the Council's in principle support for the A4 to 8 scheme as C. D is a process issue, which is the speed that the proposals will now move through the DCO process means that it will be challenging to take all relevant decisions back to committee. So we will need a delegation in the first instance to make sure that we are able to hit deadlines for submitting information, accepting that we will bring back issues to committee as and when we can within the timescales of the DCO process. In this context, and Dom may want to comment or Steve may want to comment at some point, we may want to set up specific arrangements for dealing with this schemes and other schemes of the same scale, such as East West Rail and Cambridge South Station, that are coming forward and will have similar pressures. I will leave it at that, Chair, and happy to take questions.
Okay, members, do you have any questions for Jeremy on this agenda item? Councillor Milnes.
Thank you, Chair. One of the things that I'm interested in is the impact on the climate. You've mentioned various issues. We know that black tarmac emits quite a lot of black body heat. And whether or not there's any movement in terms of materials that actually produce a better result in that context. The question over traffic I'm interested in, and the assessment, and particularly in light of pandemic reduction in traffic, if that is continuing. And then the last point I'd like to just check with you is on permeability of the route and retention of both vehicle traffic, but particularly on non-motorised traffic, such as bikes, walking and so on. Thank you.
Through the Chair.
Go ahead, please, Jeremy, and then Councillor King.
Yeah, thank you. The first point on tarmac, we would be expecting Highways England to be minimising as far as possible any construction impacts in terms of carbon emissions, but it probably is fair to say that the construction, albeit significant, is probably the smaller element of the emissions from the scheme. The bigger element will be the increases in traffic seen as a result of the scheme over a period of years. So yes, I think the answer is yes. You know, we'd be expecting Highways England to minimise that as far as possible, but I think the bigger point is probably the traffic. On the traffic issue and with relation to COVID, traffic levels across the county as a whole are broadly back up to pre-COVID levels. However, it is worth noting that Cambridge is one of a number of places across the country, including Brighton, including Oxford, where there does appear to have been a significant change in patterns, which we don't know whether that's a permanent thing or whether it's just a different, well, whether it relates to the employment sectors or whether it's just a different reaction, but we'll still go to the same place. So Cambridge itself is seeing a different pattern to the rest of the county and indeed the rest of the country at the moment. And on permeability, the point is well made, and it is a fairly key issue, and I think it is relevant to a number of wards on the route. There is certainly an ongoing discussion about not just the provision of crossings, but also the standard of those crossings with Highways England at the moment, and it is likely to be an area that we are going to need to represent strongly on.
I've got, Councillor Minns, if you don't mind, because I've got 4 speakers, then I'll come back to you again after that. Thank you. So I've got Councillor King, Councillor Howell, Councillor Mandy Smith and Councillor Sharp.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could I reiterate a plea for the temperature, please, because it's getting increasingly cold in here.
I will second that. It is.
Right. So if we could have a go at that, that would be wonderful. What I'm going to say, Chair, is that it's not going to come as any surprise to Steve, because we've had a lengthy exchange of emails about temporary weight restrictions. Now, there is some work undertaken by Highways England on the Guyherne roundabout, which is right next to my division. And no provision has been made for temporary weight restrictions. And the answer I originally got was, well, we didn't have them for the A14. So one oversight justifies another, perhaps. And I think we're walking into another oversight here, because I would like to propose that we add to recommendation C an agreement with Highways England, subject to the provision of temporary weight restrictions where appropriate. Now, I don't see why we as a county should pay for those, because the advertising costs about £1,000. You know, Highways England is replete with money, we're not. So I think it's quite reasonable for us in our discussions with Highway England to say, we want you to pay for the temporary weight restrictions. And that is my proposal, and I feel very strongly about that, as you probably gathered. Thank you, Chair.
Jeremy, would you like to comment?
Yes, just to say that actually Highways England has passed the Council drafts of agreements based on the A14 agreement, and we have gone back to them and said that is not appropriate. It is likely to be a fairly testy negotiation, but we are not accepting the A14 position as a starting position on agreements between the authorities on such matters.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, that will include temporary weight restrictions.
If there is an assessed need by the Council for temporary weight restrictions, we would be looking to include those in any agreements with Highways England, yes.
That does seem a bit conditional, Chair, but we will pursue.
Yeah.
Okay, Councillor Howell, then Councillor Smith and Councillor Sharp. Councillor Beckett.
Chairman, with your permission, I would rather speak after Councillor Smith, who is the local member.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Councillor Howell. Basically, I would like to back up what Councillor King has said, which I think, Mr Smith, you've realised that. Basically, I support the upgrade of the 428. Please don't get me wrong, I do support it. It's very much needed. There is some tinkering to do, which officers are talking to parishes. I'm happy with that. But we do have to learn a lot of lessons from the A14. It has left us with, I mean, in my area, there's roads that need repairing, that it's due to the A14 damage, and I can't, you know, there's still discussions going on. We need to be able to fix those roads quicker than what we have done with the A14. So I know you're trying, and I know you're going to bring a paper back in July, but, you know, residents need to know what's happening. And also, the footpaths, they need to... footpaths, they need to be more joined up than what they have been with the upgrade of the 14. Again, I've been left with the A1307 in between, and others are going to be the same, and I apologise for being very personal, but, you know, we need to make sure that these footpaths connect with each other, for example. We're connecting villages in some cases, and if I can say, with regards to the temporary weight limits, I would like to second that proposal. I think we may need to make it as strong as possible. The County Council, from what I understand, can put them in, but the cost comes into it. So I fully endorse what Councillor King says, and I think for the sake of our residents, we need to back all this up and be a lot stronger with the 428 than we were with the 14. That's it.
I think...
but I do support it.
Thank you. I think Andy Preston would like to come in.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, just to respond on the particular aspects of HGVs following inappropriate routes and the particular aspects of weight restrictions. We are very much discussing this with Highways England. We're also discussing this with the Department for Transport also, because it's actually quite common on all of the strategic schemes on the highway network that the strategic traffic diverts onto the local network and causes, as you're aware as local members, some significant challenges. I think the challenge with the weight restrictions is the police will not enforce. And it is our issue, and what we're also doing is discussing enforcement such as ANPR, looking at doing things differently with Highways England, and looking at this nationally. And the Department for Transport are very interested in this also, because as Councillor Smith has already highlighted, there is significant damage to our network caused by the A14, which is again a burden on the taxpayer, and it's caused some significant issues for the County Council to resolve, which we are also discussing with the Department for Transport. So they are very interested in discussing how we can approach this and look at this more strategically. And certainly with the A428, we will be discussing in very much fine detail how we can mitigate this well in advance of the scheme starting construction, and look at what options we have to prevent it from happening, looking at doing things differently. We've got the time to do it, so that's certainly what we are pushing very heavily with Highways England and the Department for Transport.
Councillor Howell, do you want to speak now?
Just checking it's finished down there, Chairman.
Yeah, I'd like to come back in a minute, so...
Do you want me to carry on, Chairman? Or?
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Chairman, thank you. Well, I think this is a wonderful major infrastructure project, and it's going to benefit many people in the southwest of South Cambridgeshire, and I think this is excellent. However, when this construction is taking place, please remember that all these villages to the south of the A14 has just had the A14 built, and we had all the construction and everything that's happening there, and now we're having everything again with regards to the 428. So we're a little bit battered and bruised already in that particular area with the amount of traffic, especially large construction traffic. Therefore, I can only endorse what has already been said with regards to weight restrictions. It's very important. We appreciate it's coming to our area, but it's really important we look after our residents in that particular area. One of the things I'm interested in, and I know you've touched upon it in the actual paper, is when it's the old A428 is detrunked, and what happens then. And I think we've got to make sure that Highway England and you have a robust discussion there, and that is something that I'm sure now you will now do. Some of the things that are happening there, which Councillor Smith already touched upon, is footways need to be actually joined up with each other, because sometimes on the A14, we have some wonderful footways which just stop, where for a little bit extra foresight we could have actually linked that into another one, and it could have been quite a well-used footway. And also, can I look at some of the wider implications? It's often touched upon in your report about Hen Brook, a small stream, hardly worth talking about to many, but it has major implications far further down the line in places such as Little Granston, where we're already having small problems with flooding, and we don't want this to exacerbate the problem. So I ask for a wider look at sometimes and some of the implications upon this, but also let's protect our residents who once again are going to have a major infrastructure project on their doorstep. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Sharp.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I'm in support of the proposal in terms of the A428, because I lived, prior to moving across to East Cambs about 7 years ago, for 14 years on a farm cottage just east of St Neots, half a mile off the A428, and I used to see the clogged traffic and everything else. I attended the briefing yesterday from Highways, and I did raise a couple of questions, and it's in support of Councillor King and Councillor Smith, because the answers I got I wasn't very convinced by, because I think there will be running through the villages both south and north of the A428. Plus, I think the traffic delays that are going to happen during construction, the officer from Highways, I can't remember his name, I think had very unrealistic assumptions in terms of the likely traffic delays. Now, obviously, I know this is during the construction period, but that 3 or 4 years is going to affect the villages through, so I very much support something to stop the HGVs going through the villages, which will certainly make life a lot more difficult for residents around that area. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Beckett.
Thank you. I just wanted to come back to the de-trunking of the 428 again. I note in the report it states that we want Highways England to bring it up to standard, but I believe Highways England actually offers two options to councils. One is to bring it up to standard, the second is to give us funding to be able to do that ourselves. And I don't know whether officers have investigated that and whether our idea of up to standard, especially with active transport and everything else, might actually be different to Highways England standard, and whether it might be good to investigate how much funding we could get from Highways England to bring it up to a standard that's fit for us.
Jeremy or Andy, would you like to respond?
Well, I'll start, but Andy may want to jump in as well. The standards conversation is one that is ongoing. There are significant differences in some areas, one of which is in regards to the standard of the replacement asset they will put in place, to fill some gaps. For example, local access roads joining up bits of the old A428 with either the St Neots junction or the Caxton Gibbet junction, where I think Highways England had a very different view of the world to the County Council as to what the appropriate design standard was, and that is still a live debate. A second area is the design standard for pedestrians and cyclists, where the County Council's view is if you're providing infrastructure, it should be to the standards that apply to a County Council, not to a standard that you wish to set yourself, and that is an area of significant debate at the moment too, and actually one where we've got technical and legal advice on, because it's actually potentially a very big difference in terms of standard and in terms of cost. The issue of the standard of the de-trunked road is actually one where Andy's probably got more context than me. But if it's a new piece of kit, we'd be expecting at least a 40-year design life and ideally funding for resurfacing during that time. For the existing piece of kit, it's potentially a bit different, but Andy's got a bit more context than me.
Thanks, Jeremy. Through you, Mr. Chairman. There are two aspects here. There's the de-trunking, and then there's also, as Jeremy said, there's the new construction. So in terms of the standard that's referred to with regard to the de-trunking element, that's purely around safe and serviceable. So it's about the standard of the asset itself in terms of the maintenance that's being carried out to it. The de-trunking element won't see any improvements in terms of, for example, cycling facilities alongside, which we are very, very keen on as an authority to promote with Highways England. That sits within the main project. The de-trunking side is looking at maintenance of that road as it currently stands. So that's the de-trunking element. And then the separate element is part of the main project about potentially providing a cycle route alongside it, segregated cycle route alongside, which is separate from the de-trunking element. That will be done as part of the main scheme. And looking actually along the corridor then, how we can improve facilities for cycling, walking, facilities along that corridor as a whole, as has already been mentioned, connectivity through there and improving the east-west movement, potentially St Neots to Cambridge as a cycle route it has the potential using the alignment of the old road. But when we talk about de-trunking, we're purely talking about the condition of the existing road rather than improvements in terms of its as a facility from that perspective.
Thank you. Councillor Giles, then Councillor Milnes.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I'm going to be very parochial and talk about not only just St Neots, but perhaps Eton Soken. We are right on the borders of Bedfordshire, and it was interesting to note the comments by fellow councillors about rat running. Historically, Bedfordshire have been very, very astute, call it that sort of word. And most of the villages in Bedfordshire, which adjoin the Eton Soken and St Neots, have actually got weight restrictions on them, intentionally. Just leaving one road from Staunton Moor, which is the main grain store and HGV route, through Eton Soken Bushmead Road, and it does. The road there is narrow and it's, well, terrible state. So we know that that is an intentional route, a rat run route from Bedfordshire. Also, I'm sure the officers are aware that there is a huge, great development planned in Bedfordshire at Wyboston, Dennybrook, which will have an effect on the town of St Neots. And I wonder whether the officers can talk to Bedfordshire and perhaps in the planning of the A428 Dennybrook HGV problem, suggest that there is a dedicated HGV route through the Dennybrook new estate onto the A428. It makes such logical sense, but I don't know whether that's in your gift or not. But please be aware that there are problems waiting to happen there. I'll leave it there for the moment, Chairman. Let's have a heated debate on it.
Thank you. Councillor Milnes, then ask Jeremy and Andy to come back.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask, while the officers were here, that the Local Access Forum was involved, particularly with those permeability issues that we mentioned, and I'd like to just put in a little mention of the horse community, the equine community, who would like to see bridleways involved in that as well. Thank you.
Jeremy and Andy, would you like to respond to those points, Councillor Giles, Councillor Milnes?
Yes, certainly. With the Dennybrook issue, I think it's probably not one for the A14 scheme, but we will bring it up with the Transport Assessment Team at the County Council, who liaise on major developments and make sure that they've got it in their mind as and when they're asked to engage on that development. So I think that's probably, yes, we will do that. Andy?
And just to add to that as well, obviously there are numerous, the Central Bedfordshire, Bedford Borough and the district councils are obviously heavily involved with the A428, and we are actually all working together as well. So we are all talking to each other in terms of understanding each other's areas and impacts from that point of view. So particularly South Cambridgeshire and Huntingdonshire with the County Council, we are working very closely. There will be a joint statement of common ground and the teams are working very closely. So certainly Councillor Giles we will mention that development and ensure that that's incorporated into those discussions.
Right, thank you for that. And Bushmead Road, remember, Bushmead Road. Thank you very much.
Okay, so members, I think what I'm hearing from the debate is broadly accept to the recommendations, however under C, and I'm not trying to put words in members' mouth, but let me make a suggestion, then let Councillor Smith come in. Under C, where we say agreements with Highways England, in brackets, including but not restricted to temporary wait orders. Would that be a reasonable close brackets? And I'll just check with officers if they feel that they are happy with that. Go ahead, Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm very happy with that. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's a good way forward. I don't think I understand about third parties and other organisations, their problems, but we should do all we can. So I do agree with that, and I think we should try. So thank you.
Officers, would you like to comment?
I think, Chairman, the fact that it says not restricted to, I think we're happy because clearly we want a solution that works. We don't want to be limited to a specific solution at this stage. We want to make sure that we've got a solution that will be effective, and clearly we will involve the local members in coming up with that solution and ensure that
as long as weight limits are included. Thank you.
So, Councillor King, do you want to move that?
I'm happy to move that, Mr. Chairman, but I just do want to clarify one thing. When Andy was speaking before, I was just struck by the thought that I'm glad he's not playing for England today, because that sound I heard was a football being kicked into the long grass. Because once you start speaking to government about possible solutions, this is going to take years, not months. So, you know, what I would like to say is we want temporary weight restrictions and we want them now. So we don't need to wait, we just need to do it, and I'm very happy to support that proposal, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Okay, members. I think that's a formal proposal then, in the name of Councillor King. including, in brackets after Highways England, including but not restricted to temporary wait orders. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Howell, Councillor Smith. Any members object to that? Can we take that by affirmation then? Agreed? Okay, thank you. Thank you, members. So, therefore, just for good order, we have the recommendations A to D, including that small amendment we made to C. Can I take by affirmation that we agree to those recommendations? Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Good discussion. Okay. Could I move on, please? And I will still try and do something about the heating because it seems to be getting cooler, not warmer. I was told it was centrally controlled. It seems to be centrally controlled to get colder. And I don't know if one of our colleagues in the engineers could just see if there's anything they can do downstairs for the twist an arm somewhere. It seems to be getting colder, not warmer. Okay, item 8, East West Rail Company. So I think Jeremy is up again to introduce this. Can I just hand over to him?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the East West Rail Company has undertaken a second round of non-statutory consultation on the central section routing of the East West Rail proposals between Bedford and Cambridge as part of a wider consultation on the entire route between Oxford and Cambridge. The consultation actually closed about 10 days ago, but the County Council has negotiated an extension to the consultation period to enable committee to consider the draft response that is put before you in this paper today. And then we are seeking agreement of the consultation and delegation to the Director in consultation with the Chair and Vice Chair to make any amendments to the consultation following committee. The East West Rail proposals is part of a strategic route from the east of England to the west of England, central England and southern England, and has been promoted by a local authority consortium for pretty much the last 25 years. In 2017, a wide route corridor between the Bedford area and Cambridge was selected by Network Rail at that time to be taken forward for further work. And in 2019, they plumped on a narrower corridor within that broad corridor between going through Bedford Station to a station on the East Coast Main Line somewhere between just north of Sandy and just south of St Neots, and then a station at Camborne, and then coming into Cambridge from the south. The consultation document before us puts forward 5 route options that expand on that in more detail, and they are seeking views on that. They are also asking for views on a northern approach into Cambridge, which they had previously discounted but have now carried out further technical work on. And and they are asking the question, do people think that they were right to discard that at that point? They remain of the view that that route is suboptimal for a range of reasons at this point in time. The draft response takes the view that actually there is scope for more information to be provided on many of the points that are still outstanding in terms of the impact of the scheme, and there are many areas where actually we would want more detail before we plumped on any of the options they have selected, or indeed on the northern or southern approach into Cambridge. So I think there's a lot of detail in the consultation documentation, but there's also a lot of information that is still outstanding. For example, on vertical alignments, they've got alignment shown with an awful lot of embankment and viaduct, where actually there's probably scope for something that's rather closer to ground level and therefore less impactful in terms of the land envelope it takes and the noise and visual impacts of the railway as it moves through the landscape. So there's a lot in the paper. I won't go through it all in detail, but very happy to take questions and Yeah, and I think probably the final thing to say is that we will need to represent back to the East West Rail Company quickly. So, so we'll be looking to take comments from this and agreement with Chair and Vice Chair in an amended response as quickly as possible in order that we can then get back to the East West Rail Company. Thank you.
Members, at this point, if it's okay with you, I'd like to invite Dr. William Harold to present to us, and then we'll have an opportunity to seek clarification from Jeremy and Dr. Harold, if that's okay. Dr. Harold, welcome from all of us to you.
Good morning. Thank you very much. My name is William Harold. I'm representing the East-West Rail Cambridge Approaches Action Group. I've been looking at the East-West Railway around Cambridge for the best part of a year now, and I've provided the chairman with some suggested text for the response of the County Council, particularly on the question of the approach to Cambridge. This is to ask East-West Rail Company to provide some specific evidence, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to provide some background on this now. East-West Rail object to a northern approach to Cambridge on the grounds that it would require between 40 and 85 property acquisitions as the railway approaches Cambridge from the north. This is because they assert that the number of tracks would have to go up from 2 to 4, and there isn't enough room to fit the new tracks in. Thameslink in London managed 24 trains per hour through London on 2 tracks. And in contrast, there are currently 6 trains per hour north out of Cambridge on 2 tracks. When challenged on this during the consultation, the East West Rail Company say that it's not actually a capacity problem, but rather one of Thameslink interfacing, so a timetable clash at Cambridge Station. Explicit timetable and platform solutions have been proposed to East West Rail Company. In any event, after the Williams-Shapps review and the replacement of rail franchises with the new Great British Railways, the timetable will undoubtedly change before the East-West Rail service starts in 2030. We also note that Bedford Borough Council's consultants are challenging East-West Rail's assertion that they need to add extra two tracks through the north of Bedford. So if one discounts the engineering/operational issues, then we're left with a business case and environmental decision about the approach to Cambridge. Unfortunately, we still have no strategic environmental assessment for the approaches to Cambridge, but we note that the Wildlife Trust response still confirms that the CBRR route is the least damaging from an environmental point of view. And we can add another study from Kevin Hand, who's Vice President of the Cambridge Natural History Society, indicating that the southern approach is much more problematic from an environmental point of view. He feels this sufficiently strongly that he organised a cycle tour of the southern route for Cambridge residents on Sunday, which was well attended. The environmental assessment which we are requesting, and the Wildlife Trust is requesting, should include associated development of houses around East-West Rail stations as well. The East-West Rail have provided no credible proposals to address the Wimpole SAC for the Barbastell bats, or indeed the impact on the Mullard Radio Astronomy Observatory for their southern approach. Without wider economic benefits, the benefit to cost ratio for the central section reported in January 2020 was very low, 0.64. Yet we still see no proper assessment of housing or employment sites beyond a reference to a 3 times expansion of the Cambridge Biomedical Campus into the Green Belt, and an indication that there is no benefit in the East-West Rail serving the largest new town in England since Milton Keynes at Northstowe. We also note from the recently released Savile report that option E had the lowest potential land value uplift.
Dr. Harold, if you could wrap up reasonably soon, thank you.
I'm nearly there. The lowest potential land value uplift of the 5 options by around 700 million. The northern approach to Cambridge was not assessed. Network Rail are estimating that East-West Rail could be supporting 50 freight trains per day by 2043. This would be a huge increase on what we see today. East-West Rail are attempting to fix the route in advance of the latest iteration of the local plan and any input from the Ministry of Housing about the location and scale of development corporations. With the election of the new mayor, we have seen a cancellation of the Cambridge Autonomous Metro, so local transport plans will probably change. In summary, when the engineering issues fall away, East West Rail are attempting to settle the approach to Cambridge with no published business case, no housing or economic plan, no integration with local transport schemes, no plan for freight, no published up-to-date passenger forecast, and no environmental assessment. So we would like Section 5 of the county's response to call for these things to be included before committing to an approach for Cambridge. And I have proposed some text to you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
That's very useful. Members, do you have any questions for Dr. Harold at this point? Councillor Milnes.
Yes, Chair. With your permission, I've indicated to Dan Snowden that I'm prepared to put in an amendment that includes some of the points on Section 5 that have been proposed by Cambridge Approaches with regard to location and quantum of future housing, impact on the environment, residential impact of freight traffic, and this necessity that has been referred to for the 4-track north of Cambridge Station. With your permission, I'd like to present that as an amendment to our response.
So, if it's okay with you, Councillor Milnes, I'll check if there's any other questions for Dr. Harold. We'll definitely come back to that because that's an amendment which also reflects a number of the things Dr. Harold has said. And we also have 2 members who are going to speak. Do any members have any questions for Dr. Harold at this point? We will come back to this proposed amendment. Okay, Dr. Harold, thank you very much, and please stay with us for the discussion and the debate.
Thank you.
I'd now like to invite 2 of our colleague members to speak. First of all, Councillor Kindersley, and after that, Councillor Atkins, who also want to speak on this subject. And then we'll move to discussion and debate.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair. Can I start by making it absolutely clear that I'm here this morning in my capacity as Chairman of Cambed Railroad rather than as a County Councillor, an interest which is obviously duly noted in my Register of Interests. You'll be aware, many of you, that we've been campaigning now for over 3 years for East West Rail to compare the northern and southern approaches to Cambridge. However, you may be relieved to know that my message to you this morning is going to be on a slightly different matter. Several years ago, I sat in front of your predecessor committee, which was considering its response to the first East West Rail public consultation. Regrettably, the County Council was the only organisation to endorse the then Corridor C proposal, a proposal that not even East West Rail believed in and which was subsequently discarded by them. What East West Rail did not disclose during that consultation was the intention to promote a new town of up to 30,000 homes with a station at Bassingbourne, and it was left to organisations such as Cambed Railroad to inform communities and residents of the key missing disclosure. As then, so as now. Throughout the course of this consultation, East West Rail have failed to disclose a fundamental part of their scheme. That is, of course, a business case. We know it exists, albeit in a draft form, because East West Rail have told us it does. It has been in preparation for over 3 years. Residents, councils and interest groups have been refused sight of it. It is not unreasonable to ask why East West Rail have not disclosed this key element of the entire scheme to build a central section between Bedford and Cambridge. Normally, a scheme such as this would have the financial case for it out, front and forward. As a monopoly, it cannot be a case of commercial confidentiality. We know that previous work done on this section showed that the business case was, at best, marginal. We also know that over the course of the last 3 years, the costs as set out by East West Rail have multiplied, although they have been unable to explain why. As a small example, in January 2019, option A was costed at £1.9 billion. January 20, a year later, route E, that selected, is costed at a whopping £5.6 billion. So I would ask you to consider the strong possibility that East West Rail are not disclosing their business case because it shows that this scheme, as presently promoted, is simply incredibly bad value for the taxpayer, and that should the business case become public, it would likely mean the end of East West Rail. I invite you to consider your response to this consultation, bearing in mind no business case has been made. What has been shown, however, is that the current scheme delivers substantial blight to many communities across Cambridgeshire. Is it reasonable of anyone to endorse a plan for which there is no basis in financial rigour, which currently adversely impacts so many Cambridgeshire citizens? Lastly, this is a piece of key national infrastructure that is designed and should last for well over a century. So it is up to us to ensure that East West Rail deliver the right project, in the right place, for the right price. So far, they have demonstrated neither ability nor will to do any of that. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Councillor Kindersley. Members, do you have questions at this point for Councillor Kindersley based on his presentation? Councillor King.
Thank you, Chair. Sebastian, very eloquently put as always.
Thank you.
I'm unclear, though, what you exactly want us to do today, because we're just commenting on the consultation. So what are you asking us to do, please?
I think the bottom line is that you need to be confident as a committee, and we need to be confident in this room, that whatever you agree as a response to East West Rail makes the point that this may well be pie in the sky, because there is no business case. They have not demonstrated any kind of financials that we could believe, trust, see or understand.
Thank you, Councillor King. Any other questions for Councillor Kindersley?
Good morning, Chair and Committee. I am the County Councillor for Hardwick Division, which covers the villages which lie between Cambridge and Cambourne from the A428 as far south as Halton. The residents I represent are therefore some of the most affected by the construction of this new railway line, particularly following the preferred alignments that East West Rail has provided. And many of them have written to me to express their views and concerns. I would therefore like to make you, the members and officers responsible for transport for the county, aware of these concerns and the practical steps you could and should take to address them. First, the consultation process itself has not been well received. It was scheduled during a time when social distancing rules prevented the most popular forms of engagement, for example, town hall meetings in the affected parishes, and the consultation has closed shortly before such events might have been possible. Residents who did attend online events and meetings have reported to me that the experience was disappointing, particularly the obscure way in which questions were selected for discussion and the vagueness of the answers that were received even when questions were chosen. Information on the website was very difficult to navigate, with the most important details buried in long documents hidden behind unhelpful branding. Most residents are therefore taking their cues and information from the various action groups and parish councils which have taken upon themselves the burden of trying to make sense of the proposals. And although I am personally very grateful for their efforts, I think we can see that this is evidence of systematic, widespread communication failure from East West Rail that this is necessary. And such a failure will serve them and indeed the county very poorly in the future. I raise all this so that members are aware that the residents I represent do not feel that they have been fairly consulted or listened to. And I ask that the committee push East West Rail to engage in new discussions with clearer information with the most affected parishes well in advance of any future decision points. Second, on the northern approach, I will not labour points already raised to you, but suffice it to say that many of the residents I represent believe that the so-called northern route option has not been fairly considered and is much better placed to take advantage of the planned housing developments to the north of Cambridge. Third, and most importantly, I wish to stress to members and officers that the preferred alignments would have a significant and hugely damaging impact on the villages that I represent. There is precious little space in between the villages, and even less once East West Rail are up to date on the planned housing developments such as Bourne Airfield. And although routes have been drawn to minimise house acquisition and demolition, the resulting lines snake through the area, passing very close to hundreds, if not thousands, of houses, schools and businesses. Crossing the dense network of local roads means that for nearly the entire stretch of 17 kilometres, the tracks will be elevated by at least 4 and as much as 10 metres on current plans, leading to huge noise, air and visual pollution. Topped with diesel, passenger and diesel freight trains, I think the combined effect is an unfair destruction and burden on these villages. If the business case, as yet unreleased, does show that there are significant national or regional gains from the railway, surely the money can be found to design a much less harmful line and run much less harmful trains upon it, whatever route is eventually selected. So, to conclude, the residents that I represent are therefore relying on the Council and this committee to form an independent and considered view on the best route through the county and to push for the maximum possible environmental mitigation for whichever route is finally approved, in true consultation with the affected residents. For myself, I cannot escape the sense that East West Rail are conducting themselves with undue haste and even perhaps assuming that they have all the answers with regards to this new railway line. And I think this is a poor service to the county when this infrastructure is designed to last for a century or more. As we move into the next phase of this project, please be vigilant and proactive in securing the best outcome for all the residents in Cambridgeshire. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Atkins. Members, do you have any questions for Councillor Atkins? Councillor Howell.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor, I suppose I'm asking you the same questions as Simon King asked Mr Kindersley. What do you suggest that we do today with regards to this document?
Thank you for your question, Councillor. I tried to indicate throughout my remarks, but I will expand on them now with your permission. In terms of the route alignment, I think it is important that members and officers take perhaps if not a sceptical, at least an independent view of the route alignments, which has not necessarily been the approach in the past, and to really form an independent judgment and, if necessary, seek external advice. And that is an approach that we would like to see carried out over the next couple of years. In terms of the consultation itself, it's important in all communication with East West Rail that they do not believe that the residents that I represent feel that they have been consulted. There is a risk, I see, that in a future consultation, non-statutory or statutory, that East West Rail will say that there has already been extensive consultation and that everything is therefore fine and clear with the local residents. And I want to urge to you that that is not the case and that the residents do not feel well consulted. And if there is any opportunity in discussions with East West Rail to call for further consultation or further meetings with the affected parishes, you should push for that and seize that with both hands. And on environmental mitigation, and this applies, of course, for whatever route is chosen, it is vital that the committee really hold East West Rail to account. I appreciate the officer responsible has already mentioned there is some possibility of further work and further scope in reducing the environmental mitigation, but this will need continued vigilance and pressure because obviously environmental mitigation is incredibly expensive and the East West Rail Company will not want to do any more than it thinks it can get away with. In terms of the consultation response that you see before you, I would urge you to support the amendment that Councillor Milnes has proposed and to follow the other points I have raised in other discussions with East West Rail whenever possible. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think I'll invite Jeremy to make any comments after the inputs from Dr. Harold and the two members, and then go back to Councillor Milnes for the proposed amendment to Section 5.
Thank you, Chair, and to the speakers. Firstly, I'll pick up on the issue of timetabling and track capacity. I think it is fair to say that the Network Rail Company, also the East West Rail Company, haven't provided too much information on the detail of that. However, it is the case that the Thameslink timetable constrains the timetable in many parts of the rail network, including into Cambridge, and indeed the complexity of getting 24 trains off 2 main lines into the Thameslink core, running at 2.5-minute headways, causes constraints on the network through Bedford, through Cambridge, through Peterborough. And actually, the best way Network Rail can actually mitigate that, if they really wanted to, is by making train journeys longer so that they can fit trains more conveniently into gaps, which of course isn't where councils typically want them to go. They want those journeys to be shorter. So there are constraints here. And I'm not going to say that there isn't potential to get more with less in terms of the existing track capacity either to the north or south of Cambridge, but I would be surprised if whichever approach you picked, you did not need at least 3 tracking or 4 tracking. So I think that's probably all I'd say on that one. There's a lot of environmental assessment work still to come, and I think in the context of the comments that both of the speakers have made, the key point is probably that it needs to assess all options that are currently under consideration and not just the option that is then submitted and consulted on as part of the statutory consultation at the next stage of the work. The councillors and the representatives have given a clear steer that actually we want to see more on the alignments that they haven't taken forward as preferred options at this point in time, and the northern approach into Cambridge. In terms of the business case, yes, we haven't seen the business case. Councillor Kindersley is correct. And it would not be unusual in the process we're in not to see that business case before the submission to the Planning Inspectorate. But obviously, the more information we see earlier, the better. In the context of the growth position, I think I'd note that the East West Rail Company is not promoting the growth. That is a government remit. And there is certainly a case, and we do mention it in the committee report and in the response, that the decision-making on a route choice for East West Rail needs to be made alongside any choice on the development options that come forward, and at the moment the development options would appear to be behind the consultation on East West Rail. So whether that's a point for the East West Rail Company or whether that's a point for the wider government and the Department for Communities and Local Government, I think there's probably a question there, but I think the point is valid. In terms of further engagement, absolutely, and in terms of Councillor Atkin's point on the impacts on his ward, I would totally concur with that, and I think that the East West Rail Company haven't done themselves any favours in the context of the vertical alignments they've shown through Councillor Atkin's division. In going over everything, they would appear to be causing rather more local impacts than they might do with a more considered vertical alignment and potentially cutting or tunnels. They also cut off the corner of the Bourne Airfield site and go through Highfields, Caldercote at high level, whichever way you look at it will be very challenging, and I think they really ought to have considered other options before putting that in the public domain, would be my take on that. But I think, as they presented it, it's not good, but there is almost certainly potential for something rather better on those alignments. Whether it's acceptable to Councillor Atkins' residents and constituents is another matter, but certainly they do not appear to have put the best possible case for the alignment through the ward in the consultation document, and we would wish to represent that in the response.
Thank you. We have 2 members who wish to comment, and I think we have a written submission as well. But Councillor Mandy Smith, then Councillor Giles and Councillor King.
Thank you, Chairman. I must admit, I agree with a lot of what the last speakers have just said, and I agree the fact that we do need more information. Okay, I don't support the recommendation because basically I don't think the consultation was good. I'm looking at you, it's not your fault, sorry, I should look at you. I do apologise for that. I don't think the consultation was run properly. I don't think it was good running it through an election. Some residents only just caught hold of it late on, and then I don't think it was fair. So for that reason, I can't support it as it is. I don't think the consultation, when it was run, did reach out to enough people. It only went to villages along the line, which it's a far-reaching effect this scheme is. So, you know, and I'm also getting a bit lost. We're all being asked to make decisions on, well, we haven't got all the information. The business case is quite a biggie, because my first question was, is the scheme still actually needed? Which, is it still needed? We've had COVID in the middle, people are now working differently. But then East West Rail they're expecting residents to answer all these questions when we can't even do it. You know, I don't think the consultation was run correctly. We've had an extension. Could we ask for some sort of an extension of the consultation for our residents? And I am looking at you for that, Mr. Chairman. Because we've had, you know, I think that's quite a valid, you know, I'll leave it there.
Councillor Giles and Councillor Smith.
There you go. Thank you. Batteries don't last very long. I fully support Councillor Smith because the consultation has not been very good at all. I've got in front of me the St Neots comments as such, and basically there's 3 pages of it which I won't go through. But one of the surprising things was that they say that they were surprised that East West Rail has aligned its preferred routes to close proximity to one of the largest housing developments in the east of England. None of the 5 corridors considered in the first phase of the consultation included this land. The late inclusion has come as a shock to residents, housing developers and St Neots Town Council. You know, surely if they're consultating properly, they would have known this. They know about Tempsford. Now, Tempsford is a tiny little village, but it's going to have its throughput. Why, one asks? The answer is Bedfordshire, again, well done Bedfordshire, have planned another, I think, 5,000 houses there on the airfield site. You know, so we're missing something on here. St Neots seems to have been forgotten. Again, there is provision here for option A station, new, but would it not be better to look at, say, a proper station at St Neots at the edge of the developments and such like? Call it St Neots Parkway if you like, call it what you like. It lends itself. There's just not been enough consultation locally. 2 other points that came up from the consultation or the discussion at the St Neots Town Council was that all of a sudden, out of the blue, there's going to be a long viaduct. Now, nobody seems to know the reason why there's going to be a viaduct there. They just cannot tell us as such. So again, there's a lot of explaining to do. I know St Neots have asked for a briefing from East West Railway, and there's been nothing coming so far. But the main point which I think we need to stress is the carbon footprint as such, and they oppose, quite rightly, a diesel railway. Now, there's no need for diesel, is there, or isn't there? We talk about the railway running from Cambridge to Oxford and the X5 and all that sort of thing. Let's be real about this. What it's really there for is to carry freight from the East Coast ports to the Midlands. That's done by huge long trains, diesel pulled. Let's not forget that. Let's have a commitment from East West Rail, wherever it goes, electrify it. Please, you know, that's got to be done there. So, you know, as far as I myself as a local member are concerned, is that this viaduct needs explaining. Why the heck we need we're told that it's I think is it 12-foot something high viaduct? Why? And a commitment for electricity or electric trains. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor King.
Thank you, Chair. My goodness, this is very difficult. Some of you will know that the area I represent is the most northerly division in the county. So East West Rail ain't going to be coming to me anytime soon. But I've listened very carefully to what has been said, and I'm just not sure whether we should approve the consultation response, because so many concerns have been raised that I think we ought to consider at least going back to East West Rail and saying, try again. Because, you know, I just fear that we will be approving something that so many of us have so many reservations about, that, you know, it's going to come back and bite us. But I'll be guided by my colleagues who are directly affected, like Councillor Giles, Councillor Smith, Councillor Howell, you know, as to whether they think that's the right course of action. But that's my thought at the moment. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Fuller, did you want to come in?
Thank you, Chairman. I think we're confusing ourselves possibly, though, here in talking about agreeing a consultation response or not. Apologies, Councillor King, because, and I've heard what Councillor Giles has said, but everything that's been said is actually in the proposed response. And I think that's the right thing for us to do, is to make these comments known to East West Rail. Clearly there are significant concerns. I actually think Jeremy and his team have done a fantastic job of capturing those in the proposed response. You know, just to Councillor Giles's point, I'm particularly looking here at points 10 and 11 of the response, which very specifically covers, and I'm going to be parochial as a representative of a Huntingdonshire area here, but that very specifically captures those concerns around the St Neots and the surrounding village areas. And it very explicitly makes the case around keeping options open for future St Neots station, depending on the quantum and location of growth. So, you know, these things have been covered incredibly well here. I think we need to be realistic that this railway line is happening. They've already started building it at the other end, let's not forget. And frankly, I think it would be a mistake for us to not submit a response or to try and go back and debate with East West Rail around extending consultation periods, you know, doing extra consultation periods, whereas we know that question has already been posed and they've already explained that they're not prepared to do that. So what we shouldn't do is lose our voice as the County Council. We have a very significant stake in this. We shouldn't lose our voice altogether by saying, well, actually, let's not put this response in, or, you know, let's take a different tack here. I think there are lots and lots of detailed concerns, you know, and I'm prepared to hear the amendment that's been proposed. I'd like to hear more detail on that, but I'm very comfortable with the content of the consultation response. As I've said, I think it very adequately covers the concerns, you know, largely the concerns we've heard today, and indeed many, many more. So I'm quite content to support this, but I am, you know, looking forward to hearing the detail of the amendment.
Okay. Councillor Howell.
Thank you, Chairman. I think I should first start by thanking Mr Smith on putting together this consultation with what has been provided by East West Rail, which is not as much as we wish. And I believe that I'm going to say about one thing, and that is the business plan, and the lack of the business plan, which we all know and has been told us many times has been in consultation. When we recently had a scheme for the A14, a business plan was put together, and it was found that this particular scheme, which, sorry, when I say the A14, the old A14 road, was it didn't stack up. For whatever reasons, it didn't stack up, and so the scheme fell to the wayside. And that's fine, and the local member accepted that. They were disappointed, but they accepted that, and we moved on. We have no idea on this business plan, if this is what is going to be feasible. We especially don't know if in the last year, with the changes of the way that we all work, if it's even now feasible. When you consider that I myself, and I'm sure many of us, this is my 4th meeting this week, but the only time I've had to cross the threshold of the front door of my house. Every one of them has been done in front of a computer screen. So I ask again, you know, where is the business plan, especially what we should be now looking at is the revised business plan because of what's been happening with regards to the pandemic. People want, in my area, my division, people want the railway. They want it. But what they don't want is people, and especially governments and us, to waste money. They hate that even more. And therefore, I feel that I don't really know where to go. And that's why I was looking to a certain degree to guidance on how to vote on this. Do I vote for this non-consultation and say our part, or do I just say this is ridiculous, we don't have enough information, and Mr. Smith has put together what he can, but we haven't had enough views and looks at it yet to see, yes, we can support it, no, we can't. I would ask, Chairman, that we, shall we say, with the recommendations, we make it very clear that we cannot, when the statutory consultation comes, be commenting upon that without a business plan, and that business plan should be public to everybody so they can actually consult on that. And that, I hope, is a recommendation that somebody would second, that we must have a business plan, and that should be a public document that everybody can see. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Howell. So, Dan Snowden from Democratic Services. We do have an input from Councillor Boulat, I believe. Here you go. You're not on your own.
Thank you, Chair. I'll now relay the comments to Councillor Boulat, who submitted her written comments. I did circulate these by email, but for those who haven't seen, most residents who contacted me about the East West Rail consultation are concerned about the impacts on the environment, human health, and the localised impacts of the scheme. I would like to strongly support the recommendation in the draft consultation response that PWOs be updated to commit electrification from the outset. I'd also like to express my disappointment that the scheme does not have a target rule to rule out diesel-powered EWR services. In the absence of ruling this out, which is preferable to many residents, can East West Rail commit to a maximum number of such trains a day? The consultation material makes high-level commitments and is difficult to assess many impacts, in particular noise and landscape impacts. There is also a lack of measurable targets on climate change and carbon reduction. This joint administration is committed to a 2030 net zero target, so it's important to question the environmental and biodiversity impacts of all projects. Many questions are still unanswered. In particular, the consultation documents state that ecological surveys are ongoing. Will further information on this be shared with the Council, and if so, when? It is also concerning to see there is no research referred to which assesses the impact on human health. We should ask for further information on this, as the main priority is to minimise environmental and health impacts of this scheme on our residents. Has this research been conducted already by East West Rail, and if so, when will it be made publicly available? And if not, why has it not been conducted? And that's the end.
Thank you. Thank you for those inputs. So, Councillor Milnes, can I go back to you and your proposed amendment, and also whether there's, with the amendment that you have in mind, whether there's anything based on the discussion you want to add? Oh, I'm sorry, Councillor Giles.
Can I just make a point of clarification, please, to Councillor Fuller's response? I've just been looking through the notes and the consultation, and perhaps he can point to where I mentioned about the unacceptability of a viaduct. And I believe he said that it was all covered in the consultation. All I can see under paragraph 10 and 11, I can see no reference to a viaduct whatsoever. Perhaps he can explain to me where I would find the information that it's been in there, that it's noted.
Councillor Fuller, do you want to clarify?
Yes, I think Councillor Giles has misunderstood. I specifically referenced the points around the location of the station and quantum of development being at points 10 and 11. The issue of the height of viaducts, as you heard Jeremy mention, is actually covered elsewhere in the consultation response. I haven't got it exactly in front of me now, but I'm sure Jeremy can point to you where it's covered. But it is covered, Councillor Giles, if you read the consultation response.
So there is no reference in our response to the viaduct?
No, that's the
Jeremy,
complete opposite of what I've just said, Chairman.
Jeremy, would you like to comment?
Yes, certainly. Paragraphs 23 and 24 of the draft response address the issue of vertical alignments, and if committee were minded to, that could certainly be expanded to cover the specific points that Councillor Giles has made.
That's great. It was something similar I was going to comment on. Councillor Milnes, I know Dr. Harold has his hand up, but I'd like to consider the amendments because it does reflect a lot of things Dr. Harold was saying.
Thank you, Chair. So I'd like to make some comments as one of the two members for the Shelford and Sawston division. Clearly, during the recent campaign, this was a very live event. In fact, it was a dominant aspect of the conversations that we were having on the doorstep. As you will realise, that the Route E goes straight through all of the division and would have a significant impact, and the local population have severe reservations about the proposal from East West Rail. And they include disconnection between villages, the visual aspect, the noise, and the representation of 10-metre and higher embankments is one that they are significantly concerned about. But if we go back to our task in hand today, we are being asked to approve or otherwise a response to where we are now rather than where we would prefer to be. So we accept, obviously, I think we all have terrible reservations that there is no business case for this, but we aren't being asked to comment on that. So I don't believe that postponing our decision, asking for a further extension, is a viable option for us today. I think we need to vote on this, and the work that has been done expresses all of those reservations that I've referred to. It's a very comprehensive dismantling of many of the proposals that are currently there for their lack of detail, for all sorts of things. But I would question even the consultation process itself at this stage. Indeed, I was at one of the webinars that East West Rail ran with its no public display of any questions. So whatever the questions were, we have no idea. They selected some of them. But I did ask a question about the electrification or otherwise. And this was an example where we have to understand that this is not an East-West Rail Company project alone. It's a national infrastructure project driven by the government and the Secretary of State. So 2017, it was reported that the Department for Transport actually banned East West Rail Company from considering electrification. It's never been an option. What they're relying on at the moment is the potential for future technology to answer the question of what they'll do to replace the diesel locomotives that they're planning on putting on the line. And yet the government has already announced that diesels will not be on our railways from 2040 onwards. So we've got a situation where we've got a consultation where everybody, in this particular instance, diesel versus electrification, agrees that we should be electrifying the line, and yet the response from East West Rail is we can't do it because the government won't let us. It's a government project. The decision will be taken by the Secretary of State. So in terms of our response to what is before us today, which is our response, which I think is very well constructed and answers almost everything that I've heard today, and I'm happy to go back and offer this amendment that adds further questioning over the northern approach and its foretracking, the environmental assessment, which we still don't feel has been dealt with equitably between the northern approach and the southern approach. We believe that there is a stilted response that is still trying to basically give favour to the option E, the southern approach. So that's why I've incorporated some of the suggestions from Mr. Harold's Cambridge Approaches group and offer them as an amendment to our response. So I hope that with the support of one of the councillors most affected by this, the rest of the committee will support that amendment.
Could you just read out the amendment?
Yes, I'll just log back in if you don't mind.
Or if Dan Snowden has the amendment.
Dan has it. If
I can read it out. So it's in addition to, sorry, I'm getting feedback. Section 5. So the council notes additional work undertaken on the option of entering Cambridge from the north, and the conclusions drawn by East West Rail Company that it would result in higher costs and lower passenger benefits. The council would ask that further detail be made available by EWR on the basis for its decision on the preferred route, in particular information regarding the following, and this is the addition from Councillor Milnes: location and quantum of future housing and economic growth, impact on the environment, residential impact of freight traffic, the necessity of foretracking of the WAMR with northern approach.
So in terms of the recommendations, so the recommendations are to approve the consultation response in the report, to delegate to Executive Director Place and Economy in discussion with myself and the Vice Chair. So if members were agreeable to accept the amendment from Councillor Milnes, which takes into account Section 5, the approach to Cambridge, and if members, especially Councillor Giles but others, would be happy to delegate to myself and the Chair and Vice Chair, particularly around issues of the business case for East West Rail, and also the vertical alignment on paragraphs 23 and 24, would members be inclined to accept that amendment from Councillor Milnes and then delegate the authority to us? Shall I just clarify that again? So the proposal is that on Section 5, the approach to Cambridge, that we accept the amendment from Councillor Milnes. I think, Councillor Milnes, you need a seconder for that. Will somebody second that amendment? Okay, Councillor Shaler, thank you. So that amendment is seconded. Then I propose that under the delegation under recommendation B, that some of these issues around the business case and also the vertical alignment you delegate the authority to myself and the Vice Chair to provide some added input on those matters. Councillor Howell? Okay. Can I take that by affirmation, the amendment and the fact that the Chair and Vice Chair will give inputs on those other areas? Is that agreed? Okay. Thank you.
Chairman, can I just ask, will the extra information that comes in, will that be sort of relayed out to residents so as they can also know what's going on?
Say again, Councillor Smith.
Well, we're all asking for more information. You're going to get more information in, I would hope. How does that get down to residents? I know through local members, etc. But some of the thing through the consultation has been that, you know, not all the information's been out there in the public domain.
So in terms of, and I'll let Jeremy and also the officers comment, Councillor Smith. So once we've added to the consultation response, that will be sent to members and cascaded to residents also after that. Jeremy, do you want to comment?
Yes, and actually probably adding to what you said before about the bits that the vertical alignment, the business case, I think it would be worth saying something more on the consultation process and communication, in expanding on that in the response to address Councillor Smith's issues and to hopefully let them sharpen up for the next time they do come out with information that they want to put in front of the public and members.
Okay, thank you. So the amendment is carried, and the delegation to the Chair and the Vice Chair to make those updates and communicate accordingly. Thank you, everybody. We have been going for 2 hours. Those of us certainly down here are freezing to death. Does anybody want a break, or should we try and finish? Keep going. Okay, I'll try and stop my teeth chattering. Under item 9, which is the local highways panel scorecards, Gareth, as project manager, is going to introduce this, I think.
Thank you, Chair. This paper is to inform the committee of the outcome of the Local Highway Improvement Panel priority scoreboards. The various member panels met earlier in March 2021 in each district area and have decided upon the priority schemes as listed in Appendix A, and the schemes shown above the red line are the ones for approval. It is these schemes that we seek your approval, plus the timetable for starting the new LHI process for 22-23 commencing on the 30th of June this year. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, members, you have the details of the LHI, the scoreboards, and any questions from members? Councillor King.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I have a proposal. The closure of the window is listed as Monday the 2nd of August at midday. Now, this doesn't take into account that many parishes don't meet on a monthly basis. Certainly in my division, I've had requests that this window be extended to the 31st of August. So I would like to propose that we make that change in order to accommodate parishes who don't meet on a monthly basis. And on a purely parochial level, I noticed that in Fenland, Newton in the Isles bid was just below the red line, and it scored the same as Parson Drove. So often there is an underspend with these LHIs, and if there is, can I make a plea, please, Gareth, that you will look favourably upon Newton in the Isle. Thank you very much, Chair.
Gareth, do you want to comment on the date and the underspend?
Yeah, certainly we can review the timetable if members all agree on that, and the scoring can be adjusted if there is an underspend, so schemes can move up.
Councillor King, you okay with that?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm very happy with that, and thank you, Gareth.
Councillor Fuller.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I, just clarify if I heard Councillor King correctly, was that to the end of August? Because just in my experience, most parishes I know don't meet in August. So although a bit of extra time would be useful, I'm not sure that until the end of August would be the most appropriate timescale. Although, I appreciate we don't want to push it too far into the future, but sometime September might be better if that could be accommodated.
The request I had, Chair, was for the end of August. And it's not just for the decision-making, it's also to accommodate discussions with the project's team. But if my esteemed colleague, Councillor Fuller, wants to propose a later date, I would be happy to go with that if it doesn't interfere with Gareth's timetable.
Gareth, could you comment on later date, to what extent that causes a problem?
I think, as you say, the earlier the better, but if you can agree a date, some sort of mid-September when parishes have first met, that would be helpful to keep the process on track.
And so specifically, Gareth, could you deal with a September date?
Yes, I can. We can use a date in September.
Chair, I'd also support that. Chair?
Sorry, Councillor Mills.
I'd support that because even though we're a bigger parish council in Torston, we don't meet in August. And the other thing that I wanted to say briefly about this was it wasn't clear when we put in our most recent bid that what we'd applied for was so we asked for a mini roundabout, but they're not popular anymore. In fact, we won't approve them. But not being aware of that was rather a problem. And I think some prior consultation with the team here would be a really useful either addition or making it better known that that was available.
Gareth, I think there was some discussion about providing additional guidelines for the LHIs this year.
Yes, there is, and there should be a feasibility talk with the team. So, yeah, that should be picked up. Yes, I agree with that.
Okay, I believe Councillor Beckett has a question, and then we'll go to Mr. David Stoughton, representing Living Streets, to speak to us. Councillor Beckett, go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to follow on. I think at some point there was discussed training for new members on LHIs and how we bring them forward. I don't know whether that was still possible or not.
Yes, there should have been you had an away day where I think LHIs were discussed, but we can certainly do a paper on that, yes, yeah.
Maybe slides could be circulated. There would have been slides of that meeting, probably. No, it's just that the away day that you mentioned, sorry, through you, I didn't know if there were slides of that meeting that could be circulated, but...
That's okay, yes, please. Councillor Giles, and then we'll go to Mr. Stoughton. Oh, sorry, I thought you had mentioned Jerry. Oh, sorry, you wanted to speak. Beg your pardon. Go ahead, Councillor Bird.
Sorry, through you, Chair. Gareth, for us newbies on the LLH who don't quite understand everything of it, can you explain how we know if that project is being accepted? So, for argument's sake, I've got one here, Saxon Street in Cambridge. How will I know that LHI has been accepted?
Is that on the new scheme or for the one coming up in...
On the one now, what we're looking at.
If it's on the Appendix A and it's on, it should be listed above the red line are all the schemes that were scored and accepted.
Okay, so if it's got a red line, it's been accepted.
If it's above that red line,
above,
yes, the schemes.
Above. Okay then, all right, thank you very much. Sorry, Chair.
So Dan, just before I come to Mr. Stoughton, so I think very good point has been made on a sort of refresh stroke training for the new members on the LHI process, and I shouldn't say the tricks of the trade, but you know what I mean. In other words, what are the criteria and what is the process? So yes, we will take that offline and arrange. Thank you. Mr. Stoughton, welcome from Living Streets, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, Councillors. Good afternoon now. Thank you for the opportunity to address you. I'm the chair of Living Streets Cambridge, the local branch of the National Living Streets organisation. The focus of the organisation is on improving conditions for pedestrians more or less everywhere in the country, but we're obviously local. My question to the Highways Committee is about their plans for real sustained investment in the walking environment. Our first report, From Risky Streets to Living Streets, was published on the 16th of June and highlights the lived experience of Cambridge residents using pavements and footways. It's based on over 300 responses, giving some bottom-up insight into the practicalities of walking in the city. It details the challenges of negotiating sloping, uneven, cracked and potholed pavements, street obstructions, pavement parking and overgrown hedges. It highlights the extensive problems caused by lack of repair and poor reinstatements, especially for the less able. So Living Streets initially welcomed the county-wide consultation on the local cycling and walking strategy. However, it would seem that officers have decided already what is to be done, and the public's role is simply to legitimise this. New drop curbs and pebbled paving dominate, and they're very welcome. But very little of the strategy is focused on effective repair and maintenance. Yet this is what residents have identified time and again, as well as in our survey, as the core need. Any casual walk around the city, and probably most other settlements in the county, reveals what years of neglect and disinvestment have done to make the streets less safe. We need much more ambitious and sustained investment in pavement repair and maintenance if the county walking strategy is ever to move beyond being merely rhetorical. In an era when active travel has become so important for our health and for the planet, promoting walking without ensuring a suitable environment to walk in seems self-defeating. Living Streets therefore requests some clarity about whether sustained repair and maintenance programme is now being considered by the new administration, and whether the consultation priorities are fixed or open for review. We fear that without adequate maintenance, the new curbs, pebbled paving and new junctions will quickly crumble away and bring further decay to our pavements and footways across the county. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stoughton. Any questions from members for Mr. Stoughton? Go ahead, Jerry.
Thank you, Chair. I have to agree with you. The pavements are disgusting and really need looking at. So I agree wholly of what you've said. I've read your report. Very interesting. And thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
Councillor King, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I just wanted to ask you whether you're aware that in the budget that was approved in February, additional money was allocated for footpaths, because we all recognise that they have been neglected in recent years due to budgetary pressure. Now, I'm not pretending that the amount of money identified is going to solve all of the problems, but it's a start, and it's a start that I hope the coalition administration will continue. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Yes, we were aware that some budget has been allocated. Our problem is partly about identifying the areas where it should be spent. When we feel that the local users probably have a better idea, if I'm honest, than most others. And it's really that we need to prioritise some of the quite often quite major pavements that are decaying fast, and sometimes even on shopping streets or the main routes to leisure centres, which frankly are heavily used most of the time.
Councillor Shaler.
Thank you, Chair. I also very much want to associate myself with the Speaker's comments. Being that my division is within Cambridge, this is the feedback that we are getting on a constant basis. So thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Great, thank you, Councillor Saylor. So, Mr Stoughton, you will get, on the basis of submission and the discussion today, written feedback from me within 10 days.
Thank you. That would be very welcome.
Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
Okay, members, so we move on to the Finance Monitoring Report. Sorry,
I don't think we clarified the date in September for the closure of the LHIs, but I think it would be useful if we did. So,
okay.
As that was proposed by Councillor Fuller, do you have an idea?
Chairman, it wasn't a fixed proposal. I was suggesting we allow Gareth to come to that conclusion once he's had a look at the programme.
It's a good point. Gareth, are you in a position to propose one now?
Yeah, I mean, maybe we could go for the middle of September as a compromise, if that would work.
I think it would be good to nail it down, Chair. 15th of September would be fine with me. Thank you.
Thank you.
I concur with that, Chair.
So, members, going to move to Finance Monitoring Report, item 10. Obviously, we are right at the start of the year in terms of the budgetary process. Anyway, I would ask Sarah to introduce the report. Thank you.
Hi. Thank you, Chair. This is the first finance monitoring report of the year, and it's as at the end of May. And the bottom line...
Sarah, could you move the microphone just a little bit closer to you, just
closer,
so we can hear?
Okay. Thank you. Is that better?
Yeah, that's better.
Thank you. This is the first finance monitoring report of the year, and it's as at the end of May. The bottom line is a forecast underspend of 162,000. In business planning, Place and Economy was allocated temporary funding to address COVID pressures, and the funding is used to offset the reduced income. And so the additional funding is allocated to the Executive Director line, but you will see the pressures appearing on the individual service lines. That's a summary of a revenue position. In capital, every year the capital budgets are reviewed as part of a first finance monitoring report, and they're updated to reflect carry forwards from a previous year and the revised phasing and new funding. So after Appendix 7, there's a table which details the proposed budget changes with explanations, and then these revised budgets are shown in Appendix 6. So committee is being asked to support these updated capital budgets so they can go to Strategy and Resources Committee for approval. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Members, have you got questions, especially on those Appendix 6 and 7, which are the capital ones going forward to Strategy and Resources? Councillor Sharp, go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman. Just one comment and then a couple of questions. When I first looked at the paper, it's just me being pernickety. I looked at page 105 and it said forecast outturn. That should be forecast outturn variance, because I looked at it and thought we're not going to be spending anything for the whole year. But moving down to page, if we're looking at capital expenditure, page 112, I'm pleased to see in there the A1303 Swaffham Heath Road Crossroads, because my predecessor, one of the last, well, is Councillor Shooter, has certainly mentioned to me on a number of times, you must make sure, I know there's money in the budget, and because it is a very dangerous road crossing, with those of you, probably a lot of you will not know it, on the road into Newmarket, so I'm very pleased that that's in there. But touching on that similar road, because there was a lot of work done on that road towards the Stoke and Quay roundabout at the other end, on page 137, in respect of trees, because a lot of trees were removed on that road because of the close proximity to the carriageway and the danger to, there's certainly been there's been one fatality along there, certainly I'm aware of. is that 43 trees were taken out, but at the moment none have been put back in. I just wondered what the situation was on that. Thank you, Chairman.
I suspect, I'll come to Councillor Milnes.
Actually, just wanted to say I've got exactly the same question.
Okay.
So there's reports of removal of trees and in my own parish, but with nothing happened there yet. 3 years on.
Okay. Can I ask officers if we're in a position to answer here or give a written response to that?
Chair, if I can take those two comments and come back with a written response to both members and to the committee, that would be, if members are happy with that, I'll do that.
Is that okay, Councillor Sharp? Okay. Any other questions, particularly on the capital, Appendix 6 and 7? Councillor King?
Yes, I just have a question about the impact of these changes in the capital programme. What are the changes that we're going to see on the ground as a result of this?
Thank you. The majority of the changes are just on the carry forwards because, as you know, the capital budgets are multi-year budgets, and so where there's variances, where there's underspends last year, they've just been carried forward to this year. So that is the most significant impact. And then the impact on the rephasing in effect sort of needs to be matched up with the carry forwards, because what's happened is we carry forward from last year, and then that probably means that there needs to be some rephasing forward as well. So you need to fit the two together.
Thank you, Chair. That's very helpful. May I ask a separate question? Thank you. I notice, and it's been touched upon, the tree issue. What the Prince of Wales has called tree-believe. And do we have any plans to actually accelerate the planting of trees? Because I think that would be welcomed by all of us.
Sorry, I think it's more appropriate for Steve to respond.
Yeah, I think
to
that's
that.
an officer question. Steve?
Yeah, I think it's an important priority, and I know it is, I think, also for the administration as well, to look at the tree coverage across the county, including on our own estate as well. So it is something that is we're certainly looking at. The details, I think, are still to come, but it is a priority that I'm sure that we'll deal with this year.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman and Steve. And I have just one more question, if I may. It's about the work's progress in Fenland. Just a small point, it's listed as Sutton Road, Leverington, one of the schemes, and it's actually just Leverington. Initially, Sutton Road was discussed, but that is no longer part of the scheme. And the other thing, which perhaps I should have directed at Gareth, but perhaps Steve can take this forward, or Dom. We as local members, or I as a local member, have very little feedback about the progress of these LHIs once they're approved. And the one I'm particularly thinking about is North Brink in Wisbech. I have had absolutely no updates about what's happening to that at all. And I think that it ought to be standard practice that for officers, that when the applicant, parish councils invariably, are copied in to progress, so should be the local member. Because these schemes have to have our imprimatur to be accepted. And if they have our support, then it's only right that we should know how they're progressing. And that isn't happening at the moment. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think that's a really important point, and I know communication of everything that we do, but particularly the LHIs, is of real interest, of course, to all members. When we spoke earlier about the training, refresher and training for those new members, I think what we can work into that is what you can expect as members in terms of communication from officers when we are talking to parish councils or updating on LHIs. So I think as part of that package we'll address that communication point as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions? Councillor Murphy.
Yes, through the chair, if I may, to the officer. I'm looking at the Appendix A, point 2.1, the overall position. And I'm really asking, and the overall position is, as you stated, 162,000 underspend forecast for the year end. How certain is that, given that there are major complex ins and outs with the PFI, waste PFI and COVID-19 elements identified here, really significant amounts of money? I just wonder what sensitivity analysis you've done and how you expect that figure to change, or if you do.
I can just say we're at early days in the financial year at the moment. We monitor in a very detailed way. The service, each service manager manages their budget, on a monthly basis. There are a lot of risks, but I do think probably the COVID funding we have got is probably, in all likelihood, I would assume that the pressures aren't going to be quite as great as the funding. But so I think the COVID should be self-contained, and any budget not required for that is going to be handed back to the corporate centre. Last year, there was an underspend of roughly £1 million across place and economy. And so I think that at this stage, we should be assuming that the service will be roughly on target, but you will be the first to know as pressures come through, because there may be positive pressures, there may be negative pressures, so we just don't know. But we do monitor in a very detailed way, and that's just as much as we know at the moment.
Thank you. I hope that answers your question, Councillor Murphy. Any other questions on the Finance Monitoring Report? If not, the recommendations are to review, note and comment, which I think we've done. Thank you. So can I move to item, thank you, Sarah. Can I move to item 11, which is appointments to the outside bodies? I'm looking at Dan for that. These are non-political appointments, although we've made some recommendations from Lib Dem, Labour and Independent groups, and also briefly shared with Councillor Howell, including some suggestions we've made for the Conservative group as well. So, Dan, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So as set out in the report, is to appoint members to outside bodies as detailed in Appendix 1, review and agree the appointments to internal advisory groups as set out in Appendix 2, to also appoint a member cycling champion responsible for promoting the interests of cycling across all aspects of the Council's work, linking in with the health and wellbeing responsibilities of the authority, and to appoint a transport and health member champion to promote joined-up working on transport issues between the Environment and Green Investment Committee, Highways and Transport Committee, and the Adults and Health Committee. What I propose to do is I'll take each group in... Sorry, Councillor Smith.
Sorry. Under number 11.3 is to appoint a cycling member champion, which I have no problem with. I bike myself. But can that sort of be renamed so as it includes all non-motorised users?
Good point.
I'll rename it a NMU, non-motorised user member champion. So what I propose to do is run through each group and take suggestions. So I will begin on Appendix 1, and the first first outside body to be appointed to is the A47 Alliance Steering Group, and that requires one representative.
Chairman, the Conservative group would like to put forward Councillor King.
Proposed by Councillor Howell. Can I have a seconder? Councillor Smith. And Does anybody object to the appointment of Councillor King?
Dan, just a process question. Do we need to do it by vote in this committee, or can we do it offline through correspondence?
I'm happy to do it offline in correspondence if we would prefer, because there is a delegation set out.
Would members be happy? I've shared that with Councillor Howell. I would share that with all the other Conservative councillors as well, and do it by consent offline. Would you be happy to do in that way?
Yeah, we're happy with that, Chairman. No problems at all.
Okay, thank you. I think it would be save time and be quite efficient, and we're very open to. We've already suggested a number of Conservative members. Go ahead, Councillor King.
Chair, I'm very happy with that. There is one correction, though, that is factually incorrect. And, sorry, Daniel, to spare your blushes, the Wisbech Access Working Group, you'll see that in the action log, right at the beginning of our agenda, I was put on it, and the number was increased to 3. So it should read 3 instead of 2, and it should list myself and Councillor Hoy and Councillor Tierney as the 3 Wisbech councillors. And I'm very happy to stay on that if our colleagues are supportive of that. It is a wholly Wisbech thing, so it would be appropriate, I suppose. Thank you.
Yes, that seems to make sense. I'm just looking around the room for members. Are you happy with the process that we adopt, which is to do this offline and by consent and discussion? Okay, thank you.
Is it really that cold, Chairman?
Okay, the temperature is stabilised at about 5 degrees, so... The final item is to note the agenda plan. There is one thing, because it's an important topic, under item 6 we had adopted the recommendation, but there were a number of actions, and I just wanted to make sure Dan had captured those. Dan, if you don't mind.
Yeah, there were a number of actions. Sorry, I just need to find my relevant point on the on my notes. Right. There was concern raised about the risk analysis and requesting that information to be seen. That was one matter arising. And that wraps up the safety audit issue as well. Wrapped into there. Bear with me. Oh, sorry, I've clicked on the wrong one. Strategic plan, visitor/anti-terror plan, including St John's Market Square. A refreshed consultation on the barriers required. Ideally, extended consultation. I'd like to see a more suitable barrier in keeping with the parade environment, and improved cycling safety accessibility for all users, not just cyclists, wheelchairs as well. And would want to see an amended permanent order taking into account of the changes by the end of the year.
So I think that covers it. I just wanted to check because we had raised that. Go ahead, Councillor King.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman. I didn't hear Daniel mention the SLA.
Oh, yes, sorry. I've just skipped past that on my notes. Yes, it is in there.
That's very important, I think.
That's partly, it's a good point, and why I wanted to check also we didn't miss anything. Go ahead, Councillor Fuller.
Thank you, Chairman. Now, I understand why the new administration changed the dates of meetings, you know, allowed you bed in and get things going along. But a lot of my residents were quite disappointed because we were supposed to have Highways England coming along at what was then going to be the next meeting to talk about some of the A14 issues that they've been experiencing, some of the unintended consequences. And so they were concerned the meeting was delayed, and then when we got this agenda for this meeting, and obviously saw Highways England aren't on it, they're even further concerned. So can I just confirm that the item on the July agenda here, the A14 network issues, that's to discuss that particular issue, and that Highways England will be expected to come along and talk to us about that, please? Because I'm getting a lot of concerns raised by residents, so I raise it
That's a good question. Steve, can you comment?
Yeah, that's, thank you, Councillor Fuller. That's the intention, yes. They will be coming along to the 27th of July meeting.
Thank you. I think that comes to the end of our... Councillor King, almost?
This is my last time as Chair. I do apologise. But earlier on, under the action log, there was reference to an enhanced pothole repair report being circulated in the summer, and I'd like that to be put on the agenda plan for either the July or the next meeting, because that, again, is a subject very dear to my heart and my residents' heart, and I would like to see some progress on that. Thank you.
I think having been called Mr. Pothole, it's on my agenda as well, so I would welcome it being on the July agenda. I'm looking at Steve and Dom, whether that would be possible.
Can we take that away? I've certainly got the message, Councillor King. If we can talk it through with the Chair and Vice Chair and bring it forward when it's, the time is right. Thank you.
Thank you very much, members. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I do apologise about the temperature. Yeah, I'm going to now go outside and thaw out. Thank you very much.